Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yay, let's do this. Good afternoon. Hello. I hope you're all still enjoying reunion weekend. It's great to see so many of you. I mean, it's obvious that so many of you would be here a sunny afternoon and you get to be in Wong Auditorium. And so how great is that? Quite seriously, it means a lot that you would spend your time with each other and with me and with our two Fireside Chat participants this afternoon. I was so delighted that they were willing to spend this time with you as well. Like many of you, they're leaders in our alumni community. They are really interesting people, and I look forward to giving them a chance to share their stories with you, eventually, as we go along, to take your questions, and to interact a little bit with each other as they are able to do. They do know each other. This is not a random pairing. So I'm Dave Schmittlein. I'm the Dean of the MIT Sloan School of Management, and I'll be receding into the background likely as the moderator for this session. Let me do a very brief introduction of our participants then. First, I'd like to introduce Brad Peterson. So Brad is a 1989 graduate of the MIT Sloan School of Management. You have some... incidentally, he also serves as the CIO and the CTO of Nasdaq. That would be an organization that you've heard of, for sure. He has had prior CIO roles with Schwab and also with eBay. Brad, in addition to his leadership in industry, helps me as Dean of the MIT Sloan School. He serves on this school's America's Executive Board, which is advisory to the Dean and the school's leadership. And he's also been very deeply engaged with the initiative on the digital economy, which is here at MIT as well. And I think he may touch on that a little bit. So in just a minute, I'm going to ask you to welcome Brad, but not yet, because Brad will be joined here by Frederic Kerrest. So Frederic is a 2009 graduate of the MIT Sloan School. Are there any 2009 graduates? Frederic is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Okta. As I think many of you know, Okta is a leader in the world of managing the security of information systems and access systems around the country and around the world. It's a public company, and it's done extraordinarily well. And I think, as Frederic would tell you, it had some of its origins here at MIT at the Sloan School of Management when he was a student. Frederic has also been previously a leader with Hummer Winblad and also with Salesforce.com. And Frederic's engagement, it won't surprise you, has been as a leader, among other things, with the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, the hub and home, if you will, for entrepreneurship at MIT. So would you please give an incredibly warm welcome to Brad and to Frederic. So one of these guys is a 2009 grad, and the other is a 1989 grad. Which of you is which?
Oh, man.
That's a tough start.
Yeah, exactly. How long have you been at Sloan? Dean?
For another 5 minutes,
okay.
I think. So you guys know each other. Could you talk a little bit? I mean, you know, one of the things, it's kind of a joke here, but all too often true. Not enough of our alums know each other. And they, on occasion, kind of bump into this really interesting person, and it turns out that they're an MIT alum also. And so you guys do know each other. How'd that happen?
You got to...
Thank you very much for coming. It's nice to see you all. I heard that the Muddy is apparently open, but it will also be open in 45 minutes, so don't worry about it. There will still be opportunities.
You stole my line already.
So. You said I could start. Okay, it was up to you. I've been very fortunate to know Brad. We met in 2011 actually through some introductions here at MIT. I think Mr. Dave Weber, who I saw was in the audience, introduced us, as well as Bill Aulette. And there was a great reunion in Northern California at the Computer Science Museum, which is in Silicon Valley. And at the time, I was just working on getting Okta going. We'd been in business a couple years. I was trying to find some customers at the time, and someone said, well, you should meet Brad. He's a very smart guy, and also he's the CIO of Charles Schwab. I said, well, that sounds interesting. So I went over, introduced myself just as another alum, and he was very gracious. And I went and I got to meet with him in his office, and he did not buy the software, but we did become friends. And since Brad was very kind to host me and the Okta team when we went public on Nasdaq in April 2017, which was pretty special. So yeah, it's been a great opportunity. I think as the dean said, it's pretty special when you can. I have a lot of friends in the audience from my class, but also friends from other classes, and just kind of in the community is a pretty special thing. So.
Yep. And so from my side of the story, most of that is correct. So, but I will say that in my job, so running technology for eBay, PayPal, Schwab, and now Nasdaq. So I am the perfect customer. So every technology company, wants to knock on my door, and I get to see all these great founders. My whole career after Sloan, I went out to the Bay Area, spent it in Silicon Valley, so I didn't even have to travel. They were mostly all there, but even if they weren't there, all the VCs were there, and they would bring their companies in. So the best part of my job is seeing these incredible founders, but they're not always fully incredible. So some of them have incredible ideas, incredible companies, but as people, they're not.
We didn't talk about this.
We didn't talk about this, but I will tell you, I get to discriminate on who I actually hang with. So we bridged 20 years of MIT, and it turned out that not only was Okta a really cool business model, creative, and my understanding, he built instead of writing a thesis, he built the business case while he was at Sloan and went immediately to work. I got to know Freddie, and he is an incredible person. Great business person. You'll hear some of the ideas on what he has to offer, but he's a great skier too. So as it turns out, keeping up with someone 20 years before you, it's a challenge, and that's probably the most fun is just getting to know you as a leader and a person.
Absolutely, likewise.
Now, Frederic, you have to say something nice about Brad.
No, he doesn't.
I kind of went through my initial. Okay, that was it. I mean. I think that, yeah, great. What's the next question?
Yeah.
I want to ask you guys about business, but first I'd like to ask you a question about how you engage with MIT, because you are both pretty deeply engaged here. And so, Brad, you've been involved with the initiative on digital economy. They do some things around digital business, but also how work is going to change in the time ahead. And is there something about that initiative that's particularly interesting to you?
Yeah, I think there's 4 areas that they focus on, major themes. 2 of them are particularly interesting to us. And one of the growing trends for companies is sponsored university research. So I think this is a great opportunity for us at Nasdaq. We are a sponsor of the initiative on the digital economy. Eric's mainly been the leader with Andrew McAfee. And 2 areas that we're interested, but I would encourage you to look at all 4 and all the research they're doing. It's quite broad. One is on platforms, and this whole trend towards how do you as a technology think about a platform strategy. And Nasdaq is a technology company. We're a traditional enterprise software company to other exchanges. And so we're thinking through our strategy of how do we actually turn that into a service? How do we make it more of a platform rather than a traditional enterprise software business? So if you've been involved with enterprise software, you know that's a pretty big trend in the world. The second one is thinking about talent and really where are the cities in the world going? There's some great research about super cities. I think Boston's one, New York is one, San Francisco.
Thank you for including Boston in that.
Yeah. Well, it is, and it's really where cities are getting younger. Yeah. The talent that's in the cities. If you're gonna hire, you're looking at it. It used to be Route 128. it's all moved into Boston. So those are examples, and I think even in San Francisco, it was Silicon Valley, and it has moved into San Francisco as well. So getting access to research to have that trend, and they think deeply about these trends. So I would say those two areas are particularly of interest to us when we got started, but we're pretty broad. And then we also do sponsored research in two other areas within MIT, one in Stanford, and we also have hire through the externship. So maybe if we get a chance, we'll talk about interns and externship, and that kind of links to the talent that you get directly out of MIT.
That's great. And Frederic, you've been involved with the Trust Centered in entrepreneurship as a student. I know that you engaged with some of those folks, and sometimes I wonder whether you ever left, in a sense that, I mean, I know you were pretty busy with launching a business, but the way that you've been a leader in our community and come back and help mentor students and so on. Can you talk a little bit about your engagement there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, you know, entrepreneurship is something that is very near and dear to my heart. It's something that I think is, it's great for the economy, it's great for creating jobs, it's great for helping people develop their careers, and it was certainly one of the drivers for me to come from, I'm from California, to come out here to MIT, spend 2 fantastic years here at MIT Sloan in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation program. I think I was the second season of that program. I know there's a number of my classmates who are here in the audience, and it really embodied a lot of the Mens at Manus theme that obviously pervades not only MIT, but MIT Sloan, and you see that in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation program and in the Martin Trust Center for Entrepreneurship. The course curriculum that's here is exceptional. The classes that they have, from entrepreneurial ventures to how to do financing, to thinking about structures, to thinking about people and organizational design, which are obviously key if you're building a company. And then obviously the practical side of it. I think the center has come a long, long way in the decades since we graduated. I think the programs that they have are very, very good. If you haven't had a chance, I highly recommend you look into them, whether it's Delta V or any of the other programs. They do a really great job of helping students really not only learn the materials, but then put them in practice. And half of it's just getting going, just getting started and kind of working on that. It's been fantastic to not only see the progression of Bill and the entire leadership of the group, but also throughout the school under the dean's leadership and everyone that you have on the faculty who teaches these classes. I think technology sales and sales management is still the #1 sales class, I think, taught at any major management or business school in North America. And basically, as an entrepreneur, that's what you have to do. You have to sell all day long and twice on Sundays. So it's a great, great class. It was then. It's come a long way since then. It's still here. I think that's a great representation of how the school has continued to develop. And frankly, MIT and MIT Sloan are at the forefront of entrepreneurship and innovation today. And it's something that I feel very fortunate to be a part of.
So you've supported it. You've been a mentor. You've shown up in more than a couple of classroom sessions as well.
Yes.
One wonders how you keep that octa thing going sometimes, but it means a lot. I mean, both of you have been pretty deeply engaged on campus, and that is a great thing. So let me talk a little bit about technology and your sense about the future there. Mm-hmm. Brad, you mentioned the opportunity to think or to take the best advantage of Nasdaq as a platform. And if I'm right, you correct me, but I think in over 50 countries, there are in the neighborhood of 80 exchanges that rely on Nasdaq.
It's a little more, but that's good. Yeah, that's enough, yeah.
A very, very large number of exchanges around the world in over 50 countries, way over 50 countries, rely on Nasdaq. And so that is a pretty exciting and it's a different kind of business, as you said. Right. So I'd just like to ask you, we are an institute of technology, how do you see technology changing the way that you think about that global future?
Yep, and that is really core. You mentioned I was the CTO and CIO. Yeah. And I would step back a little bit. When I was at Sloan, the CIO was the top technical job in a company. And it was really pre-web. So once the web occurred and mobile, all of a sudden there was this technology channel that became your primary product in many companies to your customer. And it flipped on the West Coast, where the CTO was an architectural role under the CIO. It became the top technology job was the one that built the products for your external customers, and the CIO was the one that really did the internal systems. So for me to be bi-coastal, I kind of have to have both. So if I'm out on the West Coast, they know I build the product for these other exchanges. If I'm on the East Coast, they think I'm the top technologist, because still on the East Coast, the CIO in financial services firms and a lot of industrial firms, that's the top job. So it's really interesting how that's changed. And when in the role of CIO and CTO, your main job is to translate for the business strategy what is happening in technology. And that's really the fun part. It's like working for REI and being a mountain climber. So at Nasdaq, we have a group that's a small business unit that is in charge of figuring out who are the best new technology companies that are getting venture funding that eventually will list. And we compete vehemently with, or aggressively with London Stock Exchange, Hong Kong, New York Stock Exchange. So I have a unique role that I can play in that the VCs want to introduce these companies to me, but part of my job is I need to meet these companies so I can translate to the company what are the new trends. So certainly all the things that are going on with cloud is just a baseline. So I would say we're building, any CTO right now is thinking, if I'm going to build a new product, I'm building it in the cloud first. And then with the cloud, you get this streaming data capability that is absolutely allowing you to have your business operate in near real time and close and eventually real time, where it used to be you had your main product and all the stuff you did on metrics was a batch job in the back. So all of a sudden business is accelerating to be real time because of the streaming data technology that's available and being innovated. And then I'm gonna say something about blockchain and crypto because you wanted that in there, but I would but I would take it up a step. So I was at Schwab and very much that's a consumer company. We all understand investing. We have stocks and bonds and index funds and things like that. So the ownership of things like tickets, and we were at eBay where we own StubHub, the ownership of tickets, the ownership of assets is really a distributed personal thing. It's ours, it's owned by us, but the record keeping was centralized artificially years ago. So I think the way to think about both payments and ownership of things that can be digitized is there's an alternative architecture, and trust will still be in there. So you're not going to have totally distributed, programmable trust as extreme as everyone talks about with Bitcoin. But Bitcoin did open up everyone's mind that there's an alternative. So I think that's what I'd like to say is I think it's got everyone thinking about a different way of record keeping for transfer of ownership of digital goods. And that's a huge innovation space that's still wide open for great companies to be built like Freddy's. So maybe I'll toss it over to Freddie. Security.
Before, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yep.
But before you do that, I want to ask you one last question about this, if I could. So, I mean, I think you all see the nature of Brad's job at an incredibly large and dynamic and complicated organization. Are there things that make it fun or fulfilling for you?
That make it fun or fulfilling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really have always, like working for Schwab was like working for REI. I love personal investing. Yeah. So I really do my own investing, and that's I spend time on it. And then the other piece of that is obviously translating the technology for the business. So both of those for me, I would say keep me coming to work every day. And I don't think there's a better job that matches kind of what I like to do and what I'm decent at doing. So.
Very decent.
I mean, one of the things, though, that I've learned in spending time with Brad over the last few years that I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit for is the amount of innovation that you're focused on at Nasdaq. If you're sitting here and you don't know that much about Nasdaq, you're like, giant stock exchange. We talked about how many countries. We talk about how it's underlying technology, but also highly regulated. Can't make any mistakes. These kinds of things. you still have a huge focus on innovation, which I think is not only pretty unique, but also I think portends for what's going to happen in the future, where all leaders need to know more and more about technology because of the opportunities you can bring into your business. Now, easier for you when you're an all digital stock market as it is, but maybe you could just talk a little bit for a minute about some of the things that you get to see in innovation and how you bring innovation into a big regulated industry like Nasdaq, and how you've done such a good job of that. Just the blockchain investments are some of them, but I know that there's a whole bunch of other ones.
Yeah, so we have we do have a small VC group.
Yep.
And then I touched a little bit about outreach to universities. And I think you get tremendous amount of fresh ideas. So we run and I think do we have an ex-intern in the room? So we ended up creating, with David Birnbach, who's an 89, but I don't think he's here today, but a colleague, a classmate, we worked together at Nasdaq, and he's a guest lecturer at MIT. And we've come up with cycling through the externship, and then we bridge from the externship in January, which only alums get to do. So we posted some jobs and said, I wonder if anyone will even apply. And we posted 4 jobs and we got 40 resumes. And the next year we posted 10 and we got 120 resumes. And the way we structure these innovation projects is we take the Sloan person and they're the product manager and the CEO. And then we hire the undergrads and they're the agile development team. And we have them iterate through, and we built a couple products through the series doing this over 5 years. And it's amazing how the business units we get the business unit to sponsor it. So you have a business unit and they're like, oh my God, you got through 3 or 4 iterations in a summer. And then a lot of the students want to come back and work on it in January. And now our whole data science and AI team has been built out of interns that decided they like Nasdaq. They decided some of the projects we work on are innovative, and we centralized AI and machine learning, which I would highly recommend. If your company's trying to do this, centralize them, because if you put them in different business units, they end up not having critical mass, and they can get a dud project, and then they'll just leave, because they can leave. The good news is there's plenty of jobs, but if you put them together in a centralized group, then you almost get the business units competing for, can I have that group work on a project for my business unit? So I think those, and we really had no formal AI or machine learning. We had folks who did analytics, but we didn't. So we formed the group a couple years ago. We picked a senior executive to run that. And that, I think, is kind of best practice right now of how you do it. And we did it out of Boston. So we did it out of Boston because you can get the talent. And they're remarkably sticky, because most folks that go to school in Boston and don't go out to California really like Boston. And so it may not be, it's really, and you lose a lot of people from, MIT and Sloan that go initially out to the Bay Area like we did. Yeah. But there's a great talent pool that just loves the Northeast and wants to stay here. So I think that's one of the other ways that we've been able to get fresh ideas and crank up this new function that didn't exist a couple years ago.
Cool. Yeah.
What about security? So obviously in our space, security is really important, and that's kind of what you guys built your whole company on, the observation of Salesforce and how much companies struggled with, the initial SaaS, and then you look at it and how many different SaaS offerings do all of our companies have today, and they all come with their own security model, and then the cloud offers another security model.
Right.
So that was the problem you saw.
Yeah, that was since this is MIT, I pulled some data just so I could seem somewhat relevant. So we started Okta in 2009. We just had our 10-year anniversary. In 2009, there was $3.2 trillion of enterprise IT spent that year. There was $220 billion of enterprise software spend, but there was only $7.5 billion of software as a service, or cloud. And I was at Salesforce early on before I came to MIT. At that time, Salesforce was about $1 billion revenue company, and all the rest of the cloud was like $6-7 billion. So if you fast forward 10 years, enterprise IT has gone from 3.2 to 3.8 trillion, so 20% growth, which is pretty good over 10 years, especially on that size of numbers. Enterprise software has doubled. It's gone from 220 to about 430 billion. So that's pretty good growth. Cloud has gone from 7.5 billion to almost 100. So 12x growth. So obviously, when you hear people talk about, now I'm going to be cloud first and all these kinds of things, you can understand why, what that momentum was. But at the same time, if you look at the ratio of those numbers, first of all, 100 billion out of 400 billion enterprise software, that means 25 cents. That means 75 cents of every dollar is still spent in on-premise software today. And more importantly, $100 billion of cloud spend is 2.5% of that 3.8 trillion. So all you hear about is cloud, 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 mobile, mobile, mobile. The reality of it is it's a rounding error. So we are still in it's the first batter of the first inning. And I think that's where it gets pretty interesting when you think about what's going to happen in enterprise technology. We were fortunate. We had Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz at Andreessen Horowitz were some of our first investors. And Mark Andreessen penned a piece in the Wall Street Journal in 2011 that said software is eating the world, that he took a lot of heat for. But if you think about what that really means, it just means that, and I'm an enterprise software nerd, by the way, just to be clear. I got a computer science degree in the late 90s. I wrote enterprise software. I started selling enterprise software. I know a little bit about enterprise software. And what you see happening is in all these businesses, just people talk about digital transformation, which I think is a massively overused term. But what it really means is people just have to find a better way to interact with their customers, their partners, their vendors, their suppliers. You think about the experience that you all have on Uber. When you leave, you press a button, and then magically a car shows up. And that's technology, talking to Google Maps and talking to payment systems and talking to other things. People expect that kind of experience now in the enterprise, right? When you go work somewhere, or you expect that kind of experience when you go interact with your bank or your hospital or your doctor's office. And so that opportunity is going to ripple through every industry, because as software becomes more prevalent, as it's easier and easier to use, you have people who are kind of digital first, like they are at Nasdaq, right? They have an electronic stock exchange, which was pretty weird, by the way, to go public, because you press a button, you don't even ring a bell. And then Brad told me later, he's like, that pressing the button did nothing. And I was like, oh.
It's all software in New Jersey that does what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, so you're on TV and you're pressing a button and everyone's cheering, and then later on he was like, that we started trading an hour later. And I was like, thanks, that was super helpful. The picture looks great though. But
yes,
anyway, so in all these industries, what you're seeing happen is not only internally, people are using a lot more cloud software because there's ROI and TCO, time to value, and all these things that everyone in the audience knows well. But the digital transformation is happening in every industry. And it's easy for us to sit here in Boston in these super cities where there's a technology center and everyone understands these things. If you go to manufacturing companies in the Midwest, the people who are building tractors are trying to build them with smart sensors so that they can really optimize how they're going to lay grain and when they're going to lay it and all these kinds of things. And so the opportunity in enterprise software, I think, has never been more exciting than it has, certainly in my 20 years. And I think the next 5 or 10 or 15 years in technology, in enterprise, and in businesses, and how everyone in this room, and certainly all the other folks that we know, have the opportunity to really be on the leading edge of this innovation. I think that's very, very exciting. Those are some of the things that I think are big trends. And then when I'm fortunate enough to speak with students who are starting their entrepreneurial journey, whether it's undergrads or grads or whatever the case may be, you can see the fire in their eyes and the opportunity. And I think that's very exciting.
So I asked Brad a question that we hadn't planned. If I can ask you one a little bit also.
Do I have a choice?
Well, I can ask.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a little bit of a spin on fulfillment, but I think you have some hobbies or some activities that you're pursuing that are multi-company kind. Can you talk a little bit about your interest in making a difference in the world through enterprises, that looking a little bit broader than Okta, if you're comfortable doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the Dean is referring to is I'm also the co-founder and the chairman of the board of a new biotechnology company called System 1 Biosciences that we started a couple years ago with a couple professor friends of mine in neurology and neuroscience who really convinced me to do it. But we are trying to find new ways to solve neurodevelopmental central nervous system disease, so epilepsy, autism, schizophrenia, using very, very modern technology. So again, we could talk more about how we're doing it. We're using organoids, which is a new biological model. We're using a lot of robotics, and we're using a lot of large data to pull out the data streams and kind of see if we can find signals from the noise in there. But I think that's a perfect example of the opportunity that's out there. The company's doing well. We've been in business about 2 years. There's about 40 people in the company. We raised a Series A round of financing. Pfizer is one of the investors. And you see the pharmaceutical companies that are still kind of chasing around a lot of these complicated drug discovery problems by kind of wandering around in an oasis, in a desert looking for an oasis. And it's not really a systematic or procedural way of doing these kinds of things. Now, I'm not going to claim that I am any sort of a PhD in biology, so if there's any questions that are coming in the Q&A, feel free to take them offline. But I can tell you that certainly using modern technology and thinking more, in terms of systems and in terms of how you can manage large data sets and how you can use modern technology to solve some of these big problems, I think there's a lot of interesting ones. I have a lot of personal and family reasons that I'm interested in that business. Certainly, I think if you can find new ways and quicker ways to help people with epilepsy and autism, it's certainly something worth spending time on. But I think that also, we were talking about this. I didn't get a chance to hear Mr. Bloomberg's commencement speech yesterday, but you were there and you talked about some of the other things that he said people need to focus on and take advantage of innovation and entrepreneurship.
Yep.
I think climate was one of them and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity to have significant impact, I think, across a broad spectrum using technology and entrepreneurship today.
Yeah. I don't know, Brad, if you want to say a little, you were on Killian Court, I think, yes?
Yep. And you were as well.
I was. Yeah. But I get to sit in the shade underneath this.
So if you haven't watched the commencement speech, it's available.
You said it's up on the MIT website already, so yeah.
Yeah, so Bloomberg was the commencement speaker, and he had he told one joke. He said, he's a massive billionaire, multi-10 billionaire, and he said, "I'm not going to pay for your student loans." And they're like, "Oh, darn!" But he did announce that he is committing $500 million, to really fight climate change, and something I think we weren't aware of, that he's been working for quite a number of years already, trying to lower the number, and I think they said they've halved the number of coal power plants in the United States. So he's very serious, and he had a direct message out to the students, and he talked about the 50th year of the moonshot, and he said, "This is your moonshot."
It's kind of a call to action, it sounded like.
Yeah, it was very much of a call to action.
Yeah.
And I think MIT is uniquely positioned. We were talking before this, where is MIT uniquely positioned to make a difference in the world, not just the United States? And I think what you talked about, the proximity to the great talent helping human disease, and all the medical and health expertise in the Boston area, I think that's a unique competitive advantage. And then in energy, certainly that ties into what Bloomberg was talking about, all the deep science that MIT has always had around current and future energy sources. So it's pretty exciting for how does Sloan tie into that?
Yeah, and if you don't mind just adding, so in terms of context, another part of the messages on Killian Court at commencement was the 1969 moon landing, and the sort of anniversary of that in some way, and the role that MIT played in the navigation systems for the moon landing. And so connecting that moonshot, if you will, literally then, to what is the moonshot of today, and what is the role and relevance of MIT to that, which is exactly what you guys have been talking about, which is.
And Raphael Reif also then. Right. Quiz the students on MIT's role in the 50th anniversary and their contribution.
Lots of the answers were MIT to his questions.
Yes, they were. They got it right. So can I ask the audience a question? I heard there's, what are they called? The Rolling Sloanies?
Yeah, the Rolling Sloans are in here. I saw a couple of them.
So 2009 has a band? That's pretty good. When we were there, we did the Sloane Follies, and Dave Weber was our keyboardist. And were you a songwriter too, or just a coach?
Channel Billy Joel.
Okay.
Was that it? That was
no,
his first. That was good. Yeah, okay.
No, I do have my band socks. So we do have a Nasdaq band. So
cool.
I had a latent musical talent that I didn't expose until graduation at Sloan, but we have a Nasdaq band that is called the No Latency Experience. So a little play on high frequency trading, and well, we just call it NLX for. Yeah.
Moving right along.
Yep. That wasn't on your
That
paper.
was not on the notes.
There's nowhere on this sheet of
Okay,
paper
all
that
right.
there is that. If we're going to open it up for questions from you all in just a minute or two. One of the things I was curious if you want to say something about would be a point in, obviously you guys sprung fully formed as fantastic manager leaders, right from the womb. But if there were, if there was an experience in your background, either when you learned something you didn't expect to learn, or where you developed a bit as a leader, or just an experience that kind of mattered to you in that respect, if there is one. What would that be?
I'd love to hear, Brad, your experience.
So I
He has one, I know. I've heard
I'm
it.
thinking of it real quick. I'm trying to.
I have 30 years, as this is our 30th anniversary, so I have many experiences. But I would say that I was hired out of Sloan by someone who was world-class in computer operations, had worked at American Express, Wells Fargo, Pacific Telesis, then Charles Schwab, then eBay. So we ended up working together. He retired from eBay, and I went back to Schwab to be the CIO, CTO, and I hired him out of retirement to work for me. So he ended his career where I was probably 4 or 5 levels below him when I started out of Sloan. Yeah. And I would say that the lesson that I got, and probably all of you had this person in your career that really gave you a huge jump, and you just said, you can do it. And we heard that at the session, at the networking session, the swim, there's this person that advocates for you, and I think the word is sponsors you. And we have that, I think we have, in Sloan, you guys are doing that as well. So as a transitioning of roles, I think it's, that was the most important thing for me is having someone that bet on me, and I got a 10x job. They gave me a 10x job when I was about 32 years old, and it really jumped me forward.
Yeah, I would, along the same lines, I think just being given opportunities. So I would just recommend that, all of us here work in a people business. People always talk about business. Business is actually done between people. And if I look at, my company, for example, Okta, we don't have any heavy machinery or any equipment. It's, 60% of every dollar that we spend is on people. How do you hire, attract, retain, grow, develop the best people in the world? And, there's a pretty common saying about how, success can have many mothers and fathers. But I think when I was younger in my career, I was given a lot of opportunity by folks who, who became and now still are my mentors, just in situations that I think I assumed were way outside of my what I'd be able to do, what I'd be able to manage, or what I'd be able to accomplish, or. And it really forces you to stretch. Now, did I make mistakes? I made a ton of them. We don't have enough time to even start talking about all the mistakes I've made, I'm sure as recently as this week. But I think, just this is a room full of leaders and innovators and managers, and it's important to kind of lead from the front and kind of espouse the behavior that you want, because that's what people actually do. They don't do what you say, they do what they see you do, and they say that's how we behave. But also to make sure that you're giving the next generation or the folks that you're bringing on the team, even in junior roles, a lot of guidance and leadership and direction for sure, but also a lot of opportunity. And I think, when you can help support, you talked a little bit about the support and kind of being put in that position, but giving people an opportunity, you'd be surprised at how much they can do. And it's not for everyone, and I understand that it's, you have to kind of be comfortable with what the results might be and how you're gonna manage the entire team and everything, but I think it's a huge opportunity. You can get a lot out of people when they feel like they really have a sense of ownership and commitment and drive. And those are a couple of things that I've benefited from, certainly earlier on in my career, that I'd love to think that I do a good job of. But yeah. So.
That's great. So maybe as a final quick question, and then you've got a couple of minutes to think of questions that you'd like to ask. We talked earlier just this afternoon about the Schwartzman College a little bit. MIT's changing also. Maybe just in a short, sort of quick hit, if MIT is the best version of itself going forward, are there things that you hope for MIT?
Yeah. So Schwartzman College of Computing, I committed a day to come up and listen to the unveiling and the presentation, and I would say I came away with a lot of questions. And so my hope is that as part of that, Sloan plays a very integral role. And my understanding is Sloan has played an integral role in the formation, and it's about to be unveiled September 2019. So I guess my short answer is I hope we are not distant. I think one of the unique things about MIT is when you get the undergrads and the grads in the rest of the university together with the Sloanies, we create magic. If that is broken in any way, I'd be really concerned. So I'm hopeful that it's not.
But when you turn that around to the positive, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well, it becomes more magic.
I'm very optimistic about how it's all going to tie together.
I'm mostly optimistic. You can tell I'm a little still
yes.
hesitant, but maybe.
I'm just very optimistic about the synergies that I see with the Schwartzman College and the rest of the school, and I think it's going to be great for MIT Sloan and great for MIT, and I'm really looking forward to it in a positive way. Did that
Thanks for the recovery.
We're getting on that. Teamwork.
He's in sales, as you can tell. He's in sales.
Good teamwork.
It feels time to do something different. So who has a question, a comment, a personal anecdote, anything that they would like to say? We need a brave person to start us off. Okay, any kind of person. Just there's in the back row with the, and please use the microphone if you don't mind. Yeah, you got to.
What's up, Freddie?
Please introduce yourself.
I figured I'd start you off with an easy one.
You got to please introduce yourself.
I'm David Gold, class of 09.
There you go.
Okay, it's coming to you.
Just to set the precedent.
No, it's to both of you. As while I was at Sloan and in textbooks, you hear a lot about culture and culture as a company, and reading in a textbook really doesn't do it justice when it's in the real world, especially in larger companies, especially when you go from startup to a more mature, you're managing. You go from 10 to hundreds to thousands of people across the country and then internationally. What do you guys do, or what have you done in your companies, respectively, to make sure you instill in all the employees the culture that you think is the right one for the company?
Yeah. Happy to talk about that. So over the last 10 years, we've gone from 2 to about 1,800 employees. We now have offices in a dozen countries. So certainly I have some ideas about these kinds of things. The biggest thing is, so I think it's very, very important. Obviously, culture is something that I don't think I gave lent enough credence to when we started. And like you said, it's something you read about in textbooks and so forth. I think I was fortunate. I saw a great culture, as did my co-founder. We were together at Salesforce.com early on, so we kind of saw a very good culture there. But there's a few things about it. First of all, you have to set it very early on, and you have to espouse it from the top, because it doesn't matter, to what I was saying earlier, it doesn't really matter what you say, it's all about what you do. And how you behave and how you act, and not only how you act and how you behave when things are going easy, going well, but in particular you want to do it because there will be tough times. And in tough times, people will kind of rally around how you behave and how you act and how you think. You should always write them down. So we actually tried to write down our cultural values. We espouse them a lot. We hire a lot of people. We have 5 new employees every business day now at Okta. So you go through a quarter and you've got hundreds of new employees, and I unfortunately don't get a chance to meet all of them, or I don't get a chance to talk to all of our customers. So making sure that you're communicating out how you behave. In our case, we have 4 cultural values, which are customer first. So we always focus on loving our customers. I think historically in enterprise IT, and particularly in identity management, vendors have done a terrible job of that. So just making sure that we can align what we're trying to do with, which obviously in a subscription model you have to do. Number 2 is all about innovation. So there's a way that people have done enterprise software for 20 years, and we take the best of that, but we think there's a big way that you want to go forward. Integrity. So, there is sometimes gray lines in business, and it's basically like there is no gray line. It's white or black, and you should know where it is, and you should always be on the right side of the line. And then finally, transparency. So, if you're trying to hire, how do you get, when I've been on the road all week this week, and when I go back to my office on Monday morning, if there's a long line, figuratively or literally, of people waiting for a question, an answer from me, it means I didn't do a good job. Because what you want to do is you want to get the best people you can, push as much information down as you can, and then empower them to make decisions. And that's how you're actually going to scale up yourself and your organization, all these kinds of things. And if they can't, it means either I'm not doing a good job pushing down the information, or I don't have the right people who can make those kinds of decisions. And either way, I need to improve that situation because the company's growing and we've got such an opportunity. So the final thing is, it's not about pinball machines, and it's not about snacks, and it's not about bring your dog to work day, all of which I also have. But it's really about how people are going to act and behave amongst themselves and when no one else is watching. And we have over close to 7,000 enterprise customers now. We add about 400 a quarter. I don't meet with most of them. In fact, I don't meet with 99% of them. So all the interactions that have to happen between customers and my employees or people at Okta, you're hoping they're doing it the right way and with the right intent, which you kind of have to set them up for success. And then it's like a plant. You have to constantly water it. I mean, you can't forget about it for a day or a week or, So yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's super hard. It's something that I spend way more time and effort and energy on than I ever thought I would. But so far I think we're doing okay, knock on wood, but it's like, I only did as well as I did yesterday, so we'll see what happens on Monday. But yeah, great question.
Yeah, so I'll add a couple of comments. And I think you really had a chance to build a culture from the
scratch,
beginning.
yep.
And I think your point is, if you don't do it right the first time, it's really tough to.
Yeah, it's hard to retrofit, it's hard to change, and it's hard to, as a customer, maybe let's see how good my culture is, David. You can maybe talk about that.
It's exceptional.
Oh, thank you. Oh, great, perfect.
So, wait, remember, I
think
have
there's
a
a 3-year renewal coming up.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll have to talk about that one later.
Yeah. So we're a company that's going through a cultural change right now, and it's pretty interesting. We had a new CEO 2.5 years ago now, when she came on board, and she started as an intern, which is pretty cool. Everyone wore ties. Our prior CEO just believed that people should look, professional and wear ties. It was an East Coast thing. He hired me everyone was scared of him too, and he hired me from the West Coast, and I'm like, why are we wearing ties? So that's symbolic. It's not food and pinball machines, but it was really. A symbolic change. And I was looking at our Monday morning, we have a meeting, and there's only 3 people that have ties now, and they're all sales. And it's an ex-IBM guy that believes that, he still wants his salespeople to be out with financial services customers in a tie, but the rest of the company has no tie. We deliberately debated whether we should be a fintech company or a tech company. And I convinced, after talking with it, we convinced ourselves, and I convinced Adina, that we should go, even though we weren't culturally 100% a tech company, if we're going to aspire to do it, let's not take an intermediate stopping point of being a fintech company and then a tech company. And so she actively said, as we redid our strategy, we want to also have a culture that is very similar and evolves to be a true tech company in the end. So it's quite difficult. As you mentioned, you got a chance to build it from scratch. Most of us are evolving cultures, and it's quite hard. And of course, some of the leading Edgar Schein and folks, that's really
right here.
Yeah, developed that from here.
Cool. I think we've managed to leave time for one more question. Would there be another question from the audience? Apparently
or
there
2
is.
questions. We'll
Maybe
go short.
if we can do it
only one
quick.
of us will answer.
All right.
I'll talk fast.
I'll make it
Okay.
short. I'm Bar, Sloan 2018 and Nasdaq 2017 intern. My question is about the interface between a startup and a corporate, in kind of both of you. I was wondering, Frederic, as you were growing your company from being a startup into a corporate that ends up being listed on Nasdaq, how do you deal with the changes in cultures as well as procedures and how the work is done? And on the flip side, Brad, how did you, during Nasdaq, incorporate startup innovation into a big corporate such as Nasdaq?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. If I look at our first 10 employees, one of them is still there. We have 1,800 people now. He's doing very well. The other 9 are not. Why are they not there? Well, some of them choose not to be. Some of them, they leave at some point because it's not the right thing. We've been in business 10 years now, so that's a long time in the technology world. But the reality of it is, as you grow, especially when you're growing, at the rate at which we are, it's about a 50% year-over-year growth in the public markets. What I tell everyone is, just because, including myself, I say, look, just because you did very well at your job last year doesn't mean you're going to be the best at your job next year, because it's a completely different job. And so you want to keep that sense of innovation, but you also want to keep a sense of kind of pushing people and helping people grow and develop whatever skills they might have or they might need, or all these kinds of things. And it might be the case that the board of directors turns around one day and says, look, Frederic, you're not competent for your job anymore at the size of 5,000 people or whatever it is. Now, I'm on the board, so hopefully I'd have a say in that, but you never know. And so you really have to think about people, systems, processes you talked about, but also the strategy. And you try and keep that culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, but it gets harder and harder. We only have 2,000 people. You can probably talk about what that looks like, as you grow bigger and bigger. But it's a hard thing, and you want to make sure that you're still, what I tell people when I talk in the Okta 101, which is the introductory class or session for all of our new hires once a quarter, I'd say, if you're in finance or legal, raise your hand. Everyone else, I want you to innovate. I don't want the guys in finance and legal to innovate, because I have no interest in going to jail, and SOX compliance is a real thing, and there's a reason the SEC exists and all these kinds of things. But it's still very true, because people come to the company, and what I tell them is, look, just because we're doing something some way doesn't mean it's the right way. It just means that's the way we happen to have been doing it. So if you have a better reason for changing the way we do things, or looking at new systems, or I'd appreciate if you showed up and at least you understood why we were doing something a certain way before you just show up and go, oh, this is all broken, we have to do this other way. But there is no way that you have to have been doing it. And I think that's part of trying to maintain that entrepreneurial culture. Now it gets harder and harder. There's more systems, there's more process, quarterly closes, public markets. These are all real things, and you have to be aware of that. But I think there's still a lot of opportunity, which is something that gets me excited to go to work every week. So.
I think that was a full answer. So,
all right,
and we can talk after the session. So, was there
There's
one more?
One more question.
Okay.
And yes, ma'am.
Ayan Adam, class of '94, and I am working in the field of climate finance. So, building on Bloomberg's commencement speech on Friday. U.S. is quite behind other parts of the world today in the area of limiting emissions and building resilience. From your perspective, it's more than the coal-fired plants. It's the fire system, it's the buildings, it's the materials, it's the transportation, it's also the impact on health because of pollution and others. I just have a hypothetical question. Is it important for tech companies also to think about the impact of their carbon footprint, as well as building resilience as part of the core culture of maybe every company in the United States? Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. I would say we're seeing. So we build tools for the investor relations officer and the board. So that's another business you probably didn't know we're in, but. ESG is a big question. It's certainly, as you said, Europe is ahead of this, but having to report out as a public company, it is the leading trend, I think, that is changing right now is having to do that. And then the other one is...
You want to define ESG real quick? Just for the folks in the audience, since you guys deal with it a lot.
No.
Okay, great.
It's basically...
Sorry to derail you.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah. Yeah,
Everyone knows. Okay, great. All right, great.
Everyone knows? Good.
Great, apparently.
Okay.
I got a lot of nods.
All right, you can do it because you have to
I have
talk
to
about
report it. That's
yeah,
right.
you have to report it. But I'll say one last thing, and I'll pass it back to Freddie. So last night at dinner with my daughter, who just graduated with master's. That's why I was at commencement. She's in AI, and her friends were talking about that to train a model. It's the equivalent of emissions from 5 cars. So I think if you are a tech company, you don't want to just mess around with there's all this cloud compute. It doesn't come free. You want to be thoughtful about, not just throwing garbage data in there and expecting magic to happen. You really want to make sure that you understand, and that's what's great about MIT and systems thinkers. You kind of can get down to seeing that it's all connected, and I think ESG is probably here to stay. So
I know that's breaking red. Can I talk for a minute real quick? Okay,
Yep.
great. So I think one of the great things of the MIT Sloan School, too, is they're focused on building innovative, principled leaders. And I think that kind of falls right in line with what you're talking about. So, I think just taking one step back, just to give a little context to ESG specifically, I think social impact is something that people either take for granted or forget, in particular when they're entrepreneurs, that they can and they should bake into the culture of what they're trying to do up front. So, my co-founder and I have had, personal philanthropic interests over the years, which is fine, but in 2012 and 2013, we actually we made the first donation as a company into our local communities and started to invest in that. When we went public in 2017 in our S1, I stipulated that we would be giving shares into a group called Okta for Good, which is our social impact group. And for a number of reasons. First of all, employees, that's what employees want today. First of all, they want to be able to participate. Second of all, we believe that we have a responsibility in the communities in which we work to give back into those communities. One of the ways is certainly with climate, which I'll talk about, but other ways are also just helping those local communities thrive. You can't just work in these super cities or whatever and not help the rest of the communities that are not involved in technology necessarily grow along with those. So those are very, very real investments that we've made, and I think they're good for many, many reasons. A third piece of that, though, is what you're talking about, which is what's basically your footprint and your impact in the environment as a company. And I think I didn't even know the data on the emissions in the cars, which I think is very interesting. We have to report now out as a public company. I think you have a year leniency to start doing it, but investors are asking us on the buy side. So people, Fidelity and T. Rowe and these kinds of folks, BlackRock, are starting to ask companies like me, what is your policy? And what are you doing? And what are the studies? And what are these kinds of things? It is just starting. So for example, there are very poor benchmarks. If I try and say, okay, what are other 2,000-person technology companies doing? I can't actually find the reports yet. But I think this is very real. And I think it's one of those things where it's like carrot and stick. That's the stick, is that Wall Street's like, you're going to be doing it. The carrot is, it's not only just good business. It's just like being the right members of the communities in which you work. So I think is it more work? Yeah, totally, it's more work. But being a public company is work, and I mean that's what we do. So I think it's great. I think you're going to see a lot more of this, this is a trend that is not going away. It is certainly going to be more and more in the headlines, and I think it's a great opportunity for private industry to get behind it as well. So, yeah, thanks for the question.
So one of the really great things that I was hoping to have is that you would see come alive what an amazing alumni community that we have in these two guys and in you. Would you please thank them for this time?
Thank you.
Thank you. It was really great. That was amazing.